Yes, everyone, you know what time it is. It's your boy Jack here at the Irish Hotspur, and Brennan Johnson has just signed for us. We've received the here we go from Fabrizio Romano, and David Ornstein has just said that apparently the fee for Brennan Johnson from Nottingham Forest is around £47.5 million. It's going to be a fixed fee with no add-ons. At least that's what I just read from Lily White Rose over on Twitter, and it is going to be a 5-year deal with an option to extend a further year. And according to sources from, Ali Gold to others as well that are pretty trusted, this is one of Postecoglou's main targets. This is one of his top targets. So you could say, in a way, this is trying to back Postecoglou in a certain sense, at least when it comes to the striker areas and when it comes to the forward areas. But as well, apparently, just recently, there was a meeting that was held between Postecoglou, Levy, and Johnson's representatives to sort of show him, how he could fit into Spurs, how he could fit in to Ange's system. And I guess from there, that's what sort of triggered sort of these negotiations. And that's what sort of made this such a hot target and made this kind of such a big deal in the first place, was that sort of meeting that Postecoglou and Levy supposedly had with Johnson's representatives, and that's according to the Telegraph. Whether you're behind this signing or not, please let me know in those comments down below. Please smash the like button for us as well if you do enjoy these scout reports, and let's get into seeing why Brendan Johnson has been signed for Spurs and what he could be bringing to this team and under Ange's system. Now, straight away, when I think of Johnson's game, I do think of finishing. He scored some pretty good goals last season. I think some of those goals ended up being pretty vital for them and allowing them to stay up. But when I also look at his sort of numbers here, I'm not really all that impressed. He doesn't register too many shots, but his shots on target, how many of those shots he's actually getting, at least on target and actually challenging the goalkeeper with, is actually pretty impressive. He's getting almost close to half of them on target. And then as well, that's in the top 15 percentile if you compare him to all other wingers in his position, as well as creative midfielders too. But his creative numbers, speaking of creative midfielders and sort of wingers, you need to look at that as well as sort of shots and, how they challenge the goalkeeper. It's not really all that impressive there, right? When I feel like there's a few different explanations for that. Part of that could be, it's something that he obviously maybe needs to work on, an element of his game that still needs a bit of fleshing out, that still needs a bit of strengthening, but also could be because of how inconsistent I think Forest were last season. I do remember them struggling at numerous stages where certain weeks they looked maybe better than a relegation side. And then in other weeks, they look pretty destined for relegation. And they definitely were panicking, I remember, at some stage or another. And they didn't really seem to have a clue of how they really wanted to play. I can't really say what their identity was. I can't really say, how they really approach games. It just felt like it was, for the most part, just trying to survive, type of tactics from Steve Cooper. And I actually think he's not all that bad of a manager, but maybe it was just all the different signings and all the different kind of ins and outs from last season really did sort of throw them off, I think, as a team. And Johnson also seemed to play in a variety of different positions, or at least took up a few different roles, I think, in that team as well, which I think can also sort of contribute to, maybe how poor his creative numbers were. And then lastly, I do feel like the fact that they were the joint fifth lowest scorers from last season also sort of means that he's not going to really get that high of creative numbers. But this isn't all just a complete excuse. I'm not writing it all off here. I think this has been sort of at least a common criticism, or maybe one of the points that's been made by a lot of people that know a bit about Johnson, saying that some of his creative numbers and at least some of his creativity could be improved upon at least a little bit. And it's a part of his game that he does need to work on. But he is very direct at taking on his man. And when you look at that, you can see it kind of reflected through his carries into the penalty area. He's actually ranking pretty decently in that regard, again, compared to all wingers and creative midfielders from last season. And when I do again think of Johnson, I think of a very sort of direct sort of player that's, eager to take on his man. That being said, though, he doesn't really register that many successful take-ons. Perhaps it's because he doesn't really get all that many touches, as you can see there as well, just above the carries into the penalty area. So a lot of numbers here that we aren't really blown away by, but also kind of have to have a lot of context as well, considering I just don't think Forest were really all that great of a team last season. So you're not going to get, the best of numbers, I think, comparatively to other teams in the Premier League, or other players in the Premier League, should I say. Just, a quick maybe asterisk or note. What is interesting is that while he didn't have that many touches, per game, he actually didn't get dispossessed all that often. He compared quite well to other players, again, in and around his position when it came to being dispossessed. He doesn't get dispossessed all that often. But let's see actually how he compares to other players in the Spurs team, specifically Sonny and Kulusevski. Let's compare Sonny with Brennan Johnson here. And, It's actually a pretty interesting comparison because there are some similarities, I would say, actually, in their game when you think about it. They're both very pacey players, both very good at running in behind, actually both pretty good at running with the ball with pace as well. When they are running with speed and carrying the ball with speed, they can be very frightening. They can be very direct, and they're actually both pretty good finishers. I would describe them as maybe more goal scoring wingers than I would really say they're creative wingers. But when you do look at Sonny's numbers from what was kind of actually, according to a lot of Spurs fans, a pretty poor season by his standards, he still registered 10 goals and 6 assists. And some of his creative numbers really weren't all that bad, especially compared to this Brennan Johnson here. But let's still see, how they compare and see if there's something, to take note of. When you look at the shots on target percentage, that thing that we pointed out from earlier, that actually Brennan Johnson, I think, is one of his best attributes. It's just how much he is, or how often he is good at challenging the goalkeeper. You see, they're very close there. And Sonny, too, I would describe is a clinical finisher, a guy that usually gets his shot on target, usually does challenge the goalkeeper, just like 0.7% difference there between the two players. So that is an encouraging sign, at least, that he does, again, challenge the goalkeeper and he can be a clinical finisher of Brennan Johnson for us. But compared to the two teams, Tottenham Hotspur last season versus this Forest side, he's not getting nearly as many shots as Sonny is. And then also in creative numbers, Sonny is a whole lot better than what Brennan Johnson was last season. Sonny nearly registering 2 key passes, which is a pass that directly leads to a shot on goal. So a really good way to measure how you're able to set up teammates. And I think Sonny, one of his maybe games that one element of his game that's maybe not seen as much is sometimes he really does, pull off some pretty good passes, some pretty good creative moments to set up others, and it probably just gets overshadowed by some of his other more brilliant moments when he is trying to score. But again, this is something that when we look at somebody who we thought really didn't perform at least as well as he could have last season, at least in these kind of creative numbers, he's doing a lot better than what Brennan Johnson did last season. And one maybe something that could be encouraging, though, for at least in Brennan Johnson's case, would be the fact that, the dribbling numbers are pretty close. The successful take ons are actually quite close to each other. And then as well, the carries into the penalty area do favor Brennan Johnson, suggesting, again, one of the highlights of, his attributes, I would say, is that he's very direct. He's a decent finisher and he's, very clinical as well. So, two things that, again, seem to be sort of at least highlighting through the stats here. While there's a lot of things that seem to need to be worked on, this is something that's encouraging once again. The fact that he is, comparing well to Sonny in sort of the dribbling numbers. Now let's compare him to Kulusevski, and this is an interesting one in the fact that they're just two very different players, right? And they will be competing with each other on the right wing, at least I would imagine. And what you get with Brennan Johnson is a lot more pace. He has that ability to run in behind that Kulusevski doesn't really have as much, and he's also at least from at least recent performances, recent form, I would argue maybe a bit more clinical with his chances than Kulusevski is. You can even see that with some of the shots on target percentage that Kulusevski versus Brennan Johnson has. Brennan Johnson, again, nearly half of the shots being on target, whereas Kulusevski registers more shots in total per match than Brennan Johnson does, but is actually, only getting 23% of those shots on target, whereas Brennan Johnson is getting 46% of them on target. But then again, in Kulusevski's favor, you would say that he's far more creative and far better at creating chances for others, far better at opening up the opposition completely on his own. You can see that through the key passes, the shot creating actions absolutely smokes him there. And then also, too, when you look at even his dribbling numbers, he is better, I think, at probably taking it past his man in sort of the one-on-one moments than Brennan Johnson is. And I think Johnson's actually not all that bad in that regard, but Kulusevski is just one of a kind, I think, in those moments. And again, for what was, at least according to a lot of Spurs fans, a pretty, at least not to his best last season, not one of his best seasons. He could have done better, and he still does a lot better than Brennan Johnson in some of those dribbling numbers. But I still would say what is interesting about Johnson is he's going to offer something just different. He's going to offer that pace and behind that Kulusevski doesn't have. He's going to offer maybe more of that directness. One, having the ball, with pace. When he is carrying it with speed, he's going to be a bit more direct at trying to speed past his man. And then two, he is a better finisher from the looks of things. And from what I've seen from last season, far better and far more clinical than Kulusevski is when in that penalty area with the chances given to him. And even in recent games, I would say Kulusevski hasn't been as clinical or at least as decisive, as ruthless as he could have been. And I think Man United would be a good example. I think in the first half, he had a few chances, actually, in my opinion, to take it past his man and score, and he didn't. Whereas Brennan Johnson, who knows, could have actually done a bit better with those chances if I'm being hopeful. All right, let's take a little summary of what we've said earlier about Brennan Johnson and maybe bring up some points that might not have been said as to what he could bring to this Tottenham Hotspur side. I do feel like what comes with that pace, what comes with that speed that he offers in behind, also comes with a bit of strength. He's not really one of the smallest sort of speedy guys that I can think of. He's actually a bit harder to shove off the ball. He's pretty kind of tenacious or, pretty, aggressive when he runs. He doesn't seem to be, kind of phased by anybody trying to shove him away. So what he could bring is that pace in behind that Kulusevski just doesn't have, but also with kind of what I like about Kulusevski on the right hand side is that he has that strength where he doesn't get bullied as much. Where I think Brendan Johnson could be a bit similar as well. He's not nearly as strong as I think Kulusevski is, but he's not going to be somebody who's going to be shoved off the ball as much as somebody like I guess people would label Brian Hill is. Also, I think too, he's very good at finishing in stride. I think when I look at some of his goals from last season, I think a lot of them do sort of come from when he is kind of running with the ball, kind of with pace, kind of running at his man and, receiving the ball kind of, with in stride, in pace, and then finishing it from there. And he's very good at finishing it low in the bottom corner and just has a good sort of strike on him. And his finishes in general do seem to be very pinpointed, very clinical, very accurate. So I don't think any of them are flukes whatsoever. I'm actually pretty impressed with some of the goals that he did score last season and just how he did take them in general. And some of them I would say that are going to be kind of exciting for us is that he seems to be pretty good, like kind of how Sonny is at sort of when he is in front of goal, running at the goalkeeper with pace. He's actually very good at finishing in those situations. He's good at carrying the ball, at least again with pace too. When he's sort of standing still, I don't really rate him as much, but when he is going, when he is running, when he does have, speed and, time in front of him and grass in front of him, he looks far more dangerous. And he is actually quite good at just sort of touching it around his man and taking it past him from there. And just seems to be far better, at least at carrying it past his man when he does have that sort of grass in front of him to run and that time to sort of build up some speed, should I say. Very direct, and we saw that through some of the numbers earlier with how he tries to take it past his man into the penalty area. And just from what I can tell, seems to be very eager to try to score. It just seems very eager always to try to make something happen. And I think that's always a good thing in this Postecoglou team. And it's one of I think the main sort of core tenets of what Postecoglou is trying to bring here is just guys not be that sort of sideways sort of kind of passing on the burden to somebody else. Be direct, be positive. And Johnson, from what I can tell, at least from my seeing eye test in the past, is somewhat in that category. His stamina and his work rate definitely something that was not brought up earlier. I do feel like he is very hardworking. He's very good at trying to get stuck in for his side. I wouldn't call him, sort of slacking or lacking when it comes to the press of any kind. So yeah, I would say his stamina as well as his work rate and his willingness to try to get stuck in and help out the team defensively is definitely one of his strengths. And that definitely could translate into this Postecoglou team where we are being asked to press very high up the pitch. We are being asked to work for each other in that team. And I feel like his sort of work rate, his stamina in that press is going to be very useful to us. And he's going to offer a bit more speed and a bit more agility in that press than maybe Kulusevski does. That, Kulusevski too, though, does work very hard in it, but it's just good to have someone else who's going to work just equally as hard, but also is going to offer something a bit different in his press just because he has a bit more pace and speed about him. Let's go on to his weaknesses here. I feel like his first touch has been highlighted as one of his weaknesses by a lot of fellow Spurs fans as well as some Forest fans. And I'm not going to disagree with it at all, but there was that one stat where it did show that he's not actually dispossessed all that often with the touches that he does get and the touches that he does end up having. So there's something to say there that maybe this is maybe more of just of a seeing eye test, versus a stat sort of thing. But I think I'll leave it with the rest of Spurs fans and Forest fans to maybe judge him on that. But from what I can tell, maybe the first touch might not be as bad as what we might think. But I do feel like decision making and some of his link up play is definitely needs working on. I can't recall Brennan Johnson making too many sort of quick one touch passing or anything like that to sort of break down a tight defense or a deep low block. He seems like a guy that does better when there's a lot of space in behind the defense that he can run in behind and just play maybe one sort of 1-2 and then he can kind of stretch the defense. But he doesn't seem like a guy that's going to be very good at sort of some of those quick interchanging link up play that we saw against Brentford, where we saw Basuma and Madison linking up in such sort of clever ways. And Sonny, too, actually was quite good at it, I think, recently against Bournemouth as well. Whereas Johnson, I don't really see him as that sort of player, but I guess he could surprise us. And I guess it's part of his, going to be a part of his game that he might need to work on. Well, everyone, that about does it on the scout report here. Please smash that like button if you haven't already. If you do enjoy these, let me know in those comments down below what you think of this signing. We did bring him in for a pretty considerable fee, but also he is somebody that does seem not to be the most convincing of those sort of big signings, right? He has a bit of divide amongst the fan base of whether it's the right signing or not. All I can say is if this is Ange's choice, if this is the guy that he identified, we absolutely have to back him in it. And there is that sort of funny, thing where Spurs fans, as well as I think every football fan in general, I'm included in this, we're all guilty of it, of saying back the manager, let him pick the signings, let him, bring in the players that he wants. If this is the case with Postecoglou and Brennan Johnson, we have to support it. We can't, I think, then go to the opposite and say, oh, this isn't the right signing. I don't believe in this guy, sort of thing. I think we can have our doubts. It's not like we need to be completely overjoyed with this signing, but let's also try to give Postecoglou a bit of the benefit of the doubt as well. But I'll leave you there, everybody. Please, again, leave those comments down below what you think of the signing, and we will be seeing you. Come on, you Spurs, in the big Ange, I trust.